Interpreting texts is exciting but hard, and there's no better text that acts as a test case for our theories of interpretation than Joyce's Finnegans Wake. As I've been reading it and engaging in the secondary literature, I've been really interested in the debates that happen between scholars regarding extremes of literary interpretation. How far can we take Finnegans Wake, and by extension, every other text? What are the limitations or fetters to interpretation that keep us from making any text about anything we desire it to be? How can we hearken to the text and try to focus on what the text is saying and allow what we say to be a reading of the text which incites us to do so, not in which we steal the words of the text for our own purposes, contrary to the text and at the expense of the text. And I'm really interested by this because I think that we can see two kind of liminal perspectives, two extremes of Wakean hermeneutics pop up, which I'm tentatively calling the conservative and the liberal approaches, just as catch-all terms. In this lecture, I would like to compare these two extremes, looking at some scholars from the former and the latter and seeing how their theories compare and how really we have a sort of Shem and Sean situation. That is, we have two interconnected extremes, both with their own internal rules to their approaches, and yet neither being self-subsisting, that each demands, invokes, and implies the other. Now, the conservative approach is modest, it is reductionist, and it is necessaryist. It is trying to find what is only most essential. Clive Hart discusses this in his essay Finnegans Wake in Adjusted Perspective, where he says it is possible to prove, as I think my previous example demonstrates, that Finnegans Wake, or any part of it, is about anything at all. Such a conclusion is plainly useless. We can lead the text wherever we like. To what conclusions, however, can the text in its turn lead us? Therefore, Hart is concerned with the controlling consistency of the text, with the fact that your guesses about the meaning of any word or phrase must be justified by both immediate and general contexts, that the text limits its interpretation. Therefore, Hart states as such that we should accept only so much meaning as is necessary to make some sense of every semantic unit, and where there are several possibilities, to accept only so much as establishes the most persuasive sense. Right? So we're only going for what is necessary, what can be immediately provoked and incited by the immediate and the general context. And of course, we can see that there is going to be some kind of evasive and mysterious words here, like the most persuasive sense. What does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? Well, as we see, that's going to be something that's going to be contested, but we can see the essence behind this approach. Another example is Nathan Halper in his Notes on Late Historical Events, where he says, something will happen tomorrow, next year, 100 or a million years from now, and some eager Joycean will show that it has been anticipated. That is, that it has somehow been prophesied by Finnegans Wake. I know of several instances where some later event brought a new meaning to a phrase that Joyce had previously used, but in each case, he made some addition or change to underline his new meaning. It is not enough to say that a meaning is possible. We must show it is mandatory. We must show the syntax, the spelling, or context absolutely require this meaning, right? So we can see that there's a sort of rigor in the essence of this approach, an attempt to try to nail down what can be most essentially agreed upon. It works by a sort of consensus of what can be most directly gleaned from the context, not what is most creative or what is most coherent, because, right, I could make something that is really coherent, but that is totally off in left field compared to what is immediately kind of incited by the text. So we're not going for coherence, but we're going for essentialness, reductiveness, conservation of a sort of essential kernel of meaning that we can glean from the controlling consistency of the structural elements of the text. Another example of this conservative approach is A.M. Ritchie in his essay Awake at the Wake, or How to Tell When Not Seeing What Is Not is Seeing What Is, where he lays out a few criterion for figuring out what Finnegans Wake is about in terms of what Joyce wrote. What rules can be devised for controlling the visual distance or point of view that we establish as scholars when we approach the text? Firstly, he says, get your details right, especially where Joyce is using something like conventional grammatical structures, which does happen often. It's a tendency to assume that the Wake is just constantly speaking to something foreign, but very often it's invoking commonplace English or other language or culture idioms. Oftentimes it's using very approachable grammar. It's not always just exceeding all possible structures. Second, if there is an obvious core structure or item, treat it as such. Now, I really want to kind of draw attention to this idea of obviousness because it strikes me as a bit problematic. How do we know that what is obvious to one person is hearkening or speaking to something genuinely in the text and not just something incited by the whims of the reader? Because I think that this conservative approach tries to mitigate the mediating capacities of the reader, the choices that are actively made against the text, and we can see that in this sort of didactic approach to these pointed statements. But he continues, if there's an obvious core item transmogrified in familiar fashion, relax and enjoy it. Right? So we do allow for enjoyment, but only on edge cases where we are departing from the status quo, where we are departing from obvious cores of meaning or structure. If there is a guide from Joyce or a plausible connection with another section, part, or theme, accept the plausibility. Right? So if we've been given something, maybe it's in the avant-text of Finnegans Wake, so any of the notebooks or the typescripts or the proofs or a letter from Joyce or a schema that he made, we use this as a sort of guiding hand. Of the plausible, ask what point and stay, if possible, for an answer. Right? So be willing to allow the text to speak for itself in terms of justifying itself, of to what point, to what end gathered, as he puts it in Ulysses. And lastly, if nothing is evident or connected, use free association to see if anything turns up that is pointed, plausible, or pleasing. If the first or second, work at it. If the latter, enjoy it and pass it privately to friends, but do not let it loose on an unsuspecting public. So we can see this sort of deriding remark here where he wants to mitigate the creativity that scholars put into their work, and he wants to go for something more analytic, precise, mandatory, and necessary. Free association is a fact of literature that he wants to leave out of literary criticism. And this is kind of a common attempt to get down to the empirical bare bones, is to assume that the pleasures or facts of the reading experience or the kind of marred temptations of the interpreter are something that can be put on the back burner, that we want to try to bracket those as best as possible. So this is the conservative approach. But as we can see, there are some holes, there are some ambiguities. And the liberal approach is excessive. It is concerned with the possibilities that can be excited and incited, and the coherent networks of meaning that can be formed from seemingly disparate elements that might not even be the primary or secondary implied meaning of the text. They ask, what can be pieced together and formed into a coherent interpretation? It relies on degrees of hearkenings, on indistinct and contestable layers of meaning, on inciting meaning through interpretive decisions, and on creative conjecture. Good examples of scholars in this would be Gabrielle Rengley, Louis Armand, Darrett Attridge, Colin McCabe. These are kind of post-structuralist inflected theorists who understand that the text is always disseminating itself, always breaking down the structures that it seems to invoke, and it's always kind of playing on the edge of sense. So it's not even clear, and Hart even mentions this in his essay that I mentioned earlier, that there's not always a plausible or a clearly primary level of immediate meaning that we can use as our starting point. So clearly this is not going to work all the time, but Hart and scholars like him are ultimately pragmatists. They're trying to figure out how can we suit our principles of interpretation to fit the context in the moment. That the text will tell us when we have to go to a more extreme example, and that otherwise we ought to try to stick to kind of the lowest charged level. We ought not to, ramp it up to the extreme unless we are absolutely forced to do so by the text. Now, while many of the scholars engaged in these debates will pit themselves starkly against each other, I think that, like I've said before, this is really a Shem and Sean situation where both are implicated in the other. For example, the conservative approach demands and depends upon the ambiguities that cannot be linked to an essential or necessary level of the text, beyond a doubt. And the liberal approach depends upon the coherence, structure, and logic of a sort of baseline text it risks rending asunder by the text's own vicissitudes, if not reeled in by a more modest hermeneutic approach. To state the arguments of these two extremes in their most charitable ways, we might say that the conservative recognizes that we can, especially with a text like Finnegans Wake, do whatever we want if we really wanted to. Links can be made between the most disparate domains based upon the most scant evidence. This can lead to such excess that the text rips itself apart by the act of its own interpreters. As such, the conservative opts for a willfully modest, consciously conservative approach to hermeneutic praxis that attempts to prevent interpreters from making Finnegans Wake harder than it already is by weaving too wide of a fabric. He asks that interpreters, especially publishing literary critics, as A.M. Ritchie has implied, stick to what can be proven, or at least confidently asserted by being forced by the text to do so, and willfully leave speculation that is part of a reading at the door for the sake of hermeneutics' own sanity and continuance as a field. On the other hand, the liberal recognizes that Finnegans Wake fights against reductionism and invites creative response. Instead of empirical material and the ascertained facts leading directly to a conclusion, Joyce highlights the centrality of fiction to the human experience and contends that the fiction, being stranger and more wide a net than the facts under debate, naturally riffs on the material of objectivity and willfully perverts, accentuates, and exceeds it through creativity and the dynamics of difference. The liberal therefore enacts this as a hermeneutician, accepting the Wake's playing with scant evidence, traces of unclear events, slips of the tongue, inter-misunderstandings, and more as examples of how the text should be interpreted. Since fiction is all a question of coherence, how do I form a coherent narrative, consistent characters, plausible actions, etc., the liberal therefore accepts that this means that for the interpreter of Finnegans Wake, a little bit of conjecture, rhetoric, play, and ingenuity will be necessary to make sense of the textual bric-a-brac. Interpretation is therefore ultimately a choice to do more than the text could, more than it could possibly personally demand, more than it could let on, more than it could write. As such, the liberal ultimately leaves the question of plausibility or justifiability to a community of inquirers and experimenters who must test an interpretation for themselves, and without an objective criteria for success either. Therefore, we can see, on the one hand, the conservative attempts to save hermeneutics from the test case that is Finnegans Wake, willfully sanitizing the latter in the process for the sake of our sanity, while the liberal risks fragmenting hermeneutic praxis beyond recovery in an attempt to do the same things Finnegans Wake does: excite, exceed, tantalize, challenge, and stretch. So that being said, that's it for this lecture. I hope it's been somewhat helpful in sketching out these two extremes and figuring out where you might stand. You can check out any of my other lectures I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, post-colonial studies, and other classic literature. You can also become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. I also have super thanks if you just like to donate to the channel, because it really helps me be able to buy the books necessary to bring y'all content, but no worries, care about yourself first. That's it for this lecture, and I will see you in another one.